So the earlier we detect something, whether we're talking about Marburg in Tanzania or Ebola in Sudan or Mpox or Oropoucha, whatever, pick the disease, the sooner we can detect it, the sooner we can protect populations across the planet. This keeps Americans safe at home and abroad. It keeps all of our member states, it keeps everyone everywhere safe, because the earlier we can react, the earlier we can prevent. The second thing that we do is we turn science and data into action. And that we develop evidence-based guidance, bringing together the world's best minds, including American scientists from government agencies, academic agencies, and again, across all of our different member states, different disciplines, different experiences, different expertise, to turn data into knowledge, into know-how, and to help governments, to help physicians, to help parents make the best decisions to keep their families safe. And the third thing that we do, one of many, is to advance R&D, research and development. We work with public health institutions, manufacturers around the world to develop safe and effective medical countermeasures, like diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines, like you were just talking about with measles, to test these vaccines to make sure not only are they safe, but that they're effective, and that parents, again, have a proper information, governments have proper information to make decisions to keep their loved ones safe.
Maria, in our last 30 seconds here, WHO has faced a lot of criticism, as you know, over the last, since the pandemic has really set in. Wondering what you can say, how is WHO addressing issues of reform? How are they addressing the criticism?
Well, thanks for bringing this up, because we are addressing reform constantly. We are a learning organization. We are a technical-based organization. The reforms that we started actually began when DG Dr. Tedros took office in 2017, and we've been adapting ever since. We've learned so much through COVID, and COVID's not gone, by the way. There are many current threats that we face that we have to be ready for. We've been looking at sustainable financing. We've been looking at how we are operating in terms of how we support our own member states. We are looking at how we bring more people together so that we can act faster to prevent these outbreaks from happening in the first place and then from progressing into pandemics.
Director of the Department of Epidemic and Pandemic Threat Management at the World Health Organization, Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your work. We appreciate it. Dr. Gupta, before we let you go, I just want to circle back to this measles story here in the United States, because it is concerning parents. You have the head of the Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., suggesting that a healthy diet is the way to prevent or at least lessen the impact of measles. Maybe it's vitamin A, maybe it's cod liver oil that will help you. What is it? I mean, those have been sort of tossed to the side by serious people who study this stuff. But what is the impact of having someone with those beliefs at the very top of our health system? How does it trickle down into the system?
Well, what we're seeing is that he spent 20 years, Willie, putting that motif into the public discourse, and he can't just reverse course now. And that's what we've seen. The damage is done, and people have, and now really are firm believers that things like a healthy diet, which is really good for cardiovascular health and overall health, but it's not good. It's not as sufficient to prevent an infectious disease. These motifs are hard to break down. Once they're in, people will believe them, and he's been the leading purveyor of that. So he's created a set of problems for which he has not built a set of solutions for. But this is not something that can just be reversed overnight.
Yeah, it's real power now. You can't dismiss it anymore. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Vin Gupta, always great to have you at the table. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Joe?
And as we continue following the stock markets, obviously the last 3 days, three of the most volatile days on Wall Street in quite some time. Many on Wall Street, and also Americans with 401ks hoping that maybe the market found its bottom yesterday, may have reason to hope this morning that it's going in a positive direction. Again, very volatile yesterday, so these are just the futures. But we look overseas, and Asia had a strong night overnight. The Nikkei average up over 6%. Europe right now up 1.75%. And American stocks, Mika, are up about, the mean is about 1.5% right now, up. So, again, the market trying to find the bottom while these tariff negotiations are going on.
Also ahead on Morning Joe, our next guest says President Trump's campaign to
anything like this. And just given all of the questions about where policy is going, obviously that's going to do some damage to the economy, John.
I will tell you, it makes sense the uncertainty index is high when you have White House officials acknowledging they're delivering contradictory messages on television about trade policy. Yeah. They seem uncertain as to what it all is. Even as Peter Navarro, you just played there, seems to be increasingly on an island on trade policy. All right, Matt Egan, thank you very much. Kate?
Let's talk more about this. Joining us right now is Democratic Congressman Richie Torres of New York. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on. Let's talk about what Peter Navarro is saying now. I mean, he has the president's ear. He has helped craft this trade policy. He is the president's top trade advisor. He says he guarantees there will be no recession related to this. He also goes on to say there is not going to be any inflation. What's your reaction to that?
Well, no one should take a word that Peter Navarro says seriously. He's a voodoo economist. And, Mr. Navarro has said that the golden age of American wealth was the period from 1870 to 1913, when the United States had no indoor plumbing, no electricity, no refrigeration. So the notion that we should turn the clock back to 19th century trade policy is an absurdity. And the Trump administration's policy is causing the United States to experience the worst of both worlds, both the beginnings of a recession and inflation. The tariff policy is the largest tax increase on the American people in more than half a century. It's the largest tariff in more than a century, and it's wreaking havoc on the United States economy.
One of the big focuses today is how China is hitting back and what the president is threatening China with. You are on the House committee focused on American economic competition with China. You want the United States to have more of a trade advantage there, of course. Trump's not only promising 34% tariff on all China goods, but also another 50% if China doesn't back down on its retaliatory tariffs. Add it all together, do you think a tariff on Chinese goods of more than 100% will win the U.S. advantage?
It will have the effect of raising prices on the American people and eroding the competitiveness of the United States. Now, there are legitimate concerns about China, right? There has been cheating on the part of China. China has engaged in intellectual property theft, commercial espionage, but the administration should be pursuing a tariff policy that surgically targets critical sectors in relation to China. Instead, it's imposing tariffs on every imported good, on every foreign country, which will make life less affordable for most Americans.
What would you, I don't know if you've thought about this, but what would you or could you hear from the president that would, if not get you on board with the tariff agenda as he's laid out, make you feel better about it?
Well, the American people need a day of liberation from Donald Trump. Like, he should reverse his policy. The president is on a kamikaze mission to crash the U.S. economy. He's presiding over one of the greatest destructions of wealth that we've seen in our nation's history. Since Inauguration Day, America's lost $11 trillion in wealth. In the 48 hours following so-called Liberation Day, we lost $6.6 trillion in wealth. The Trump tariffs have had the same single-day impact on the S&P 500 as 9/11, but the difference is that the Trump tariffs are completely self-inflicted. So the president should reverse the wound that he has inflicted upon the American people and upon their pocketbooks.
President Trump says, hold on. There will be some pain, but it will get better. And a man who runs a steel company, he actually spoke with CNN yesterday, speaking with Jake Tapper, and he is one of the people who said, given his line of work, given what he has seen in terms of unfair trade practices, he is thrilled with these tariffs. Here's why. Let me play this.
When we ship that to Germany, the German government taxes our clients $128.95 per basket. If a German competitor ships it to America, it's $1.25 per basket. It is so unfair what's happening to the American worker. They can't compete when you have that kind of unlevel playing field.
And that is what President Trump says he is trying to level here. What do you say to that man?
Look, Donald Trump is achieving the opposite. And look, we desperately need a manufacturing revival here in the United States. I mean, that's why congressional Democrats passed the CHIPS Act, which is an attempt to bring back chip manufacturing here in the United States. And it's worth noting that the Trump administration is against it. And so the ultimate effect of his policy is going to be to plunge the United States economy into a recession, into an inflation. We're going to have the worst of both worlds, and the American people are going to have higher prices, fewer choices, lower quality. We're going to pay more for less rather than less for more.
You, really quickly before I have to let you go, you're one of Israel's staunchest supporters, and something that may have gotten overlooked by many in kind of this tariff chaos is something that the president said while in the Oval Office yesterday, speaking with Benjamin Netanyahu right by his side. And he says that we are having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It will go on. It'll go on Saturday. That they are going to be speaking directly to Iran now to try to negotiate a deal. Do you support the president having those direct talks?
Look, we should make every effort to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. The Islamic Republic of Iran has said that it's intent on wiping Israel off the map. And so we cannot afford a world where Iran has a nuclear weapons program that it could weaponize against our closest ally in the Middle East. That would be an unacceptable outcome.
And if that requires direct talks, you would support that?
Yes. I mean, I support every effort, every means of preventing the nuclearization of Iran.
Congressman Richie Torres, thank you so much for coming on. It's good to have you on the show. John.
Of course.
Absolutely. All right, new this morning, the U.S. Supreme Court lifted a block on using wartime powers to deport alleged gang members for now. This has to do with the administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act, which the administration used to take plane loads of migrants to an El Salvadoran prison. But in a blow to the administration's use of the law, the court said judges can review each case and that migrants do get a form of due process. That's not how the administration tried to implement this initially. So let's get right to CNN's Priscilla Alvarez on where we all go now. Easy for me to say, Priscilla.
John, look, this was one of the most closely watched emergency pending appeals that was before the Supreme Court, and it is a significant victory for the Trump administration, but it is also a victory for the American Civil Liberties Union, which brought the case. I'll get to that in a moment, but what is at the center of this is that Alien Enemies Act of 1798. That is a sweeping wartime authority that essentially wipes away the usual course for immigration proceedings, immigration processes for migrants who are subject to removal. It's only been used 3 times, most recently in World War II. Now, in this case, the administration was framed its emergency appeal as a fight over judicial power, of course, arguing that the executive has the decision to invoke this type of authority when they see fit. And the Supreme Court allowing them to continue to use it, and the president on Truth Social applauding that, saying, for example, this is, quote, a great day for justice in America. And John, it does have huge implications for the executive branch and the removal of migrants. Of course, that has been the president's pledge coming into his second term, is speeding up deportations. And this is the tool they want to use. But, and this is what the victory for the ACLU was, is that there does need to be notice to migrants that they are going to be subject to this proclamation, allowing them time to go to the courts and file habeas complaints. So that was a key concern for the ACLU and for other immigrant advocates. They got that with this, and now we'll see how it is turned back on in the days to come. John.
We'll see if it's turned back on, because that little bit of a review period is a little bit counter to how the administration tried to use this initially. We will have to see where this goes next. Priscilla Alvarez, thank you very much. Kate?
Yeah, that's a great point. And so coming up for us, as I just talked to the congressman about, President Trump says the U.S. and Iran are beginning direct nuclear talks for the first time in years. What Iran is saying about it this morning. And we have new details about who prosecutors are expecting to call to the stand when the trial of Sean Diddy Combs begins. We'll be right back.
New analysis this morning for the paper entitled, "In Trump's Second Term, Retribution Comes in Many Forms." Michael details some of the early moves by the Trump administration, including revoking security clearances of top Biden administration officials like former Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, Vice President Kamala Harris, and even President Biden himself. Also, the firing of more than a dozen prosecutors who worked for special counsel Jack Smith on 2 criminal investigations into President Trump, and actions against the press, like blocking the Associated Press from the Oval Office and ordering investigations into outlets such as PBS and NPR. And there's more, like law firms and
law firms and colleges, which I really want to ask about, because it's interesting which law firms and colleges are backing down and which ones are not. But I want to start, though, with your overall view. You covered the Trump White House in the first term, covered him this term, and on our air and also in our conversations, you've said they've been far more nuanced in their thinking, far more deliberative in their thinking. And you even used a parking analogy. Explain.
Yeah, I think the thing about Trump coming into this term is that I'd always said I'd never seen Trump do a three-point turn. A lot of what he did was blunt force, trying to beat the system or the country to a point politically or get something done. You know, he's banging on his aides in the first term to prosecute Hillary Clinton and prosecute Jim Comey. He's publicly railing against things. What's been different about the second term is you've started to see what I would call three-point turns, more sophisticated moves. The law firm executive orders is among the most sophisticated things I've seen his administrations pull off, because what they've done is they have found unilateral power that he himself is able to exercise. He doesn't have to go through the Justice Department. He doesn't have to go through the courts. He can simply sign a piece of paper or have a message sent to a law firm that we're coming for you. And what's been remarkable about it is that the law firms like Paul Weiss, a firm that held itself out as a righteous firm that was really big on promoting democratic causes, have come and bent the knee and made deals with Trump to head off these executive orders. And in the course of that, he's not only had institutions, powerful institutions, come and do what he wants, but they've committed millions and millions of dollars to legal causes that he has championed. And it's just one example of new and inventive ways that we didn't anticipate coming into this administration, that he's been able to harness his own powers. And to me, that's been remarkable.
Well, talk about the difference in reactions from not only, let's say, law firms, but also universities and colleges. For instance, Paul Weiss backed down quickly, and man, they've got a mess on their hand internally because of it. Same thing happened at Columbia. They backed down. Other universities like Princeton have said, we're going to actually use this. We're going to stand up and we're going to speak out, and they'll probably raise a hell of a lot more money from alumni because of it. And of course, Perkins Coie and other law firms are standing up to it, and they have 500 other law firms behind them.
Yeah, you've had the legal profession sort of break into two different buckets, as have universities. And a lot of these law firms, which are often dominated by litigators, have said, let's go and fight. The important thing to realize about the executive orders, like on the law firms, is that the law firms know that they're illegal. 3 judges have instituted restraining orders to stop them. They know that they're unethical.
And that's a fascinating thing, Michael, that Paul Weiss folded when a lot of their partners wanted them to fight, and they already had a federal court ruling on their side.
But here's what you have to understand about it, is that Paul Weiss, over the past decade or so, had taken on a lot of corporate lawyers. So for many years, it had been dominated by litigators, people who went out and fought the government and went to court. But these corporate lawyers came in and they started making the firm tens of millions of dollars, more money than the firm ever could have imagined. And those corporate lawyers that represent, the major companies in the country did not even want to be seen as publicly opposed to Trump in court. So even though there was a realization that the executive orders were illegal and that judges would quickly move to help the firms, they did not want to be labeled as persona non grata with the administration because of the complications it could make for them and the companies. And that was just this sort of extraordinary thing that drove firms like Paul Weiss, because of their bottom lines and fears of losing clients, to make these deals.
New York Times investigative reporter Michael Schmidt, thank you very much for coming on this morning. And still ahead on Morning Joe.
Israeli forces have carried out overnight attacks on different parts of the Gaza Strip. On Monday, the heads of 6 UN agencies called for an urgent renewal of the ceasefire. They warned of severe aid shortages and the mounting civilian death toll since Israel resumed its war last month. A strike on a residential building in Deir al-Balah has killed at least 11 people at dawn on Tuesday. Children are among the victims. Survivors have been trying to recover bodies from under the rubble. And in northern Gaza, an Israeli airstrike has killed at least 6 people. The attack on the home in Beit Lahia also injured several people. Bodies are being pulled from the rubble near the Shadi Habub Mosque. Let's bring in our correspondent, Tariq Abu Azoum. He's joining us live from Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. And Tariq, 11 people killed in just one strike in Deir al-Balah, which has seen a lot of air raids over the past 12 hours.
Yeah, that's right. Deir al-Balah, in fact, Elizabeth, has been the hub of the latest Israeli waves of attacks since the rockets were fired from the suburbs of the city towards the Israeli territories. We understand that many residential homes have been flattened. They are located outside the red zone, but the Israeli military did not release any sort of warnings for families to leave these areas, and there have been some significant physical damage inflicted on the residential areas, alongside also with the neighboring houses that have been located in the site of the strike. 11 were killed in a fresh attack that took place on dawn today in the western end of Deir al-Balah. We have seen that they are all a group of the same family member. It means that an entire family has been wiped out. They were mourned earlier today from Al-Aqsa Hospital for their burial, but the situation remains very precarious in light of the escalating military steps that have been seen taken over the course of the past few days. Recently, we have got initial signs that there are more military reinforcements have been sent to Ash-Shuja'iyya neighborhood, as the Israeli military is effectively operating in such a battered area. Alongside that, we have seen massive explosions could be heard from also the Rafah city. We can hear these explosions from where we are in Deir al-Balah, as the eyewitnesses have confirmed that these the eastern parts of Rafah city have been absolutely covered with smoke and dust coming from destroyed buildings. Then we have got very distressing scenes for emergency responders in Tal Sultan neighborhood trying to evacuate wounded people under very heavy gunfire. Could be quite heard by the Israeli military, which means that the atmosphere that they are working on have been marked by utter devastation and clear uncertainty about their fate as well. But what has been going on is an expansion of the Israeli military operations on the ground. More military pressure has been widely seen that Israeli officials stated before that it aims to force Hamas to back down and to release more Israeli captives. And recently we started to hear that Egyptian authorities managed to bring to the table of negotiation a new offer for a ceasefire deal that ranges between 40 up to 70 days. And in exchange, Hamas will release 8 Israeli living captives. We did not hear any confirmation so far, neither from Hamas nor from the Israeli side, about the approval on this offer. But as you know, mediators are trying to bridge the gaps between the conflicting parties in order to de-stabilize the scale of tension here on the ground.
Tariq Abu Azoum with the latest live in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. Thank you, Tariq.
A perceived threat, and 6 of the individuals killed were identified as Hamas members. Here's our international editor, Jeremy Bowen.
It took a week to recover the bodies of the 15 paramedics and emergency workers killed by the Israeli army in southern Gaza. They'd been buried in a mass grave, along with their wrecked vehicles. What happened, why and how they were killed, is the latest episode in the long-running and bitter controversy about the conduct of Israel's troops in Gaza. The bodies of the dead were brought back to the nearest hospital, along with a mobile dug up from the grave containing video evidence that has forced Israel to retract its original claim that its soldiers opened fire at a suspicious convoy approaching in darkness without headlights or emergency signals. The Palestinian Red Crescent is demanding an independent investigation.
The lights were on. Why they were killed? Why did you destroy the ambulances after killing them? Why did you try to dig deep and hide the ambulances? Why did you hide the bodies? Why and why?
Eve to me is basically freedom. It's a giant open universe where you can do whatever you want.
Crescent paramedics killed in the attack filmed a video in the last few minutes of his life that has raised all those questions. It was on his phone found in the mass grave near his body. It shows that the convoy was clearly marked with emergency lights illuminated and men in high-vis clothing. The shooting went on for 5 minutes. Rifat Radwan's last prayers can be heard under the gunfire. Israel is still insisting, without offering evidence, that what it calls 6 Hamas terrorists were among the men they killed. Ehud Olmert, a former Israeli prime minister, questioned the official version.
My judgment and my impression is that it smells. It smells of a cover-up. It smells of something that sounds and looks very bad for the way that the Israeli military unit conducted itself.
This was the funeral of the Red Crescent workers. At least 408 humanitarians have been killed in this war, according to the UN in Gaza, which said today that they're witnessing acts of war that show an utter disregard for human life. Israel now admits that its soldiers made mistakes when they attacked the convoy. It consistently denies it commits war crimes in Gaza. The evidence indicates that all the warring parties have done so. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
Let's bring in Israel's former ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, for more. Ambassador, very good to have you with us here in the studio. I'd just like to start with the comments that we've had from 6 UN agencies today. They've been calling for a renewed ceasefire. They've said the violence in Gaza shows, in their words, a disregard for human life. And they've added that hundreds of Palestinians have been ordered to leave, but they've said they've got nowhere safe to go to. With Israel's renewed offensive in Gaza, do you think this brings both sides closer to a ceasefire?
Well, good to be with you, Helena. What's just missing from I can hear from these UN pronouncements is any mention of Hamas or the hostages that Hamas is kept under unspeakable conditions in Gaza. So they want a ceasefire. Everybody wants a ceasefire, but we want the hostages back. And just to have a ceasefire without getting the hostages back simply lets Hamas come out and retake Gaza. In recent weeks, we've seen very large demonstrations by Palestinians against Hamas. And I think the UN should show some care for those Palestinians as well who have been living under Hamas oppression and understand that what has occurred in Gaza, and they're right in the sense that it's an enormous and immense tragedy for everyone involved. But this was brought on by Hamas's attacks on Israel on October 7th, by the massacre of 1,200 of our citizens, rape, beheading, and burning of our citizens, and the hostage taking of 252 of them, 59 of whom remain in captivity. We hope that 24 are still alive.
And on that point as well, with the prospect, of course, those hostages still being in Gaza in those conditions, we know also that for the humanitarian situation there continues to be dire for everyone there. Do you think that meaningfully, that renewed offensive means that those hostages will come out?
Well, it's a very hard question. I'm not a spokesman for the government. And these issues in Israel are even contentious. A large percentage of the Israeli population think that the Israeli government should go further and make more concessions to Hamas in order to get the hostages back, with the assumption that after the ceasefire, Hamas will violate the ceasefire and then the Israeli army can go back in and take care of Hamas. That's a very large percentage of the Israeli population believes just what I just said. Having said that, the government is proceeding on the assumption that by ramping up the military pressure on Hamas it will force them back to the negotiating table. And so far, the indications that that may be working. Hamas is showing a willingness to come back and negotiate, as far as I know. And that's what on the table is an Egyptian proposal of a prolonged ceasefire, as much as 70 days, in return for something like 7 hostages alive. There's an American proposal of the envoy Steve Witkoff, which calls for a 50-day ceasefire in return for the release of 11 living hostages. This is on the table, and the fact that it's being discussed at all may indicate that the military pressure is working.
I want to talk about some of the events that we've seen recently in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military changed its account of the IDF's killing of 15 emergency workers. Because of that video evidence that came to light, and the Red Crescent, when we've spoken to them, have said that they believe that aid workers are being targeted. After seeing the evidence, what do you think happened?
Well, first of all, they got the version wrong. I saw the clip that was in the New York Times that shows that these vehicles were flashing red lights, but the Israeli military has also said that they knew that 6 of those people killed were Hamas operatives. Now, Hamas has used ambulances over and over again, and used even medical personnel over and over again to disguise terrorists.
None of those killed were armed.
Well, they aren't, but according to the Israeli, I have to take the IDF's count into the equation here. And until disproven, the IDF has said that 6 of them were terrorists. If 6 of them were terrorists, then everything is complicit in that whole scenario. We don't know yet, and it's still being investigated. Just prior to coming on the program tonight, I called the IDF spokesman, and that was the response I got. It's still being investigated. They can't give a version until it's been investigated.
Did he indicate that there would be an international investigation allowed in?
No, I don't think so. And that's not been Israel's position for a long time, that we have a judicial system that's capable of judging itself and conducting that investigation. And in the past, investigations have been conducted in cases where aid workers have been killed. And keep in mind that we're dealing in a war situation, and I've been in situations like this, where it's intensely confusing and very frightening. About 20% of all of our casualties, our military casualties, are caused by friendly fire. We've shot our own people by accident,
in this
never mind other people.
Fog of war,
Yeah.
we have seen the highest level of aid worker casualties in 2024 in any conflict. Why would Israel be resistant to allow international observers in if that is the situation?
I think that it's not. First of all, I don't know if that's correct about the aid workers, but let's assume that it is, that there's a disproportionate number of aid workers. Aid workers are operating in a war zone, and in a war zone there are dangers, especially in a war zone.
They are protected with banners such as the Red Crescent, the Red Cross, international humanitarian law.
In a previous war, I was in a convoy in broad daylight with banners, Israeli banners, and we were bombed by Israeli jets. I think I've probably seen more Israelis killed by Israeli forces than actually than enemy. So this happens in war. War is tremendously confusing. And yes, every army, including the Israeli army, could always do more to minimize the dangers to international workers. But keep in mind, this is a war unlike any army has ever encountered, not only in a densely populated area of over 2 million people, a military force which at outset was about 30,000 terrorists, now it's probably about 15 to 20,000 terrorists, and 500 miles of tunnels underneath. No army in history, certainly not the British Army, has ever encountered anything like it.
Michael Oren, Ambassador, thank you so very much for being with us.
At Penn Medicine, sometimes the future starts.
Focused on the war in Gaza, Trump's new tariffs, and Iran. Talking to the press after the meeting, Donald Trump said his administration will be having direct talks with Iran on Saturday. He said the talks will be at almost the highest level.
We're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it. So we're going to see if we can avoid it. But it's getting to be very dangerous territory. And hopefully those talks will be successful. And I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful. We hope that's going to happen.
Let's turn now to Marwan Bishara. He's Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. He's joining us by Skype from Doha. Marwan, we were talking last hour about whether this meeting between Trump and Netanyahu might renew a sort of a push for a ceasefire in Gaza once more. But first, I want to talk to you about one of the other headlines that emerged from this press gaggle that we just witnessed. Trump said that the U.S. and Iran are participating in direct talks over the Middle Eastern country's nuclear program. He said that there's going to be a meeting on Saturday at potentially very high levels. What to make of this?
Well, that's an excellent point, Mohammed. I think that is the most important news item that has come out of this very exhausting, I don't know, it's not a news conference, it's a news something at the Oval Office. And it's very important because it's certainly not to the liking of the man sitting next to him, Benjamin Netanyahu. It is something that Trump wanted for a long time. There's been obstacles and difficulties in the process. He's been making a lot of threats and ultimatums against Iran, and the Iranian spiritual leader Ali Khamenei has in fact came out against any such direct dialogue with the United States under the threat of ultimatums. But eventually it seems that they have bridged their differences in order to come to a direct negotiations over Iran's nuclear program and probably other bilateral issues between the two countries. This is huge because this will also have major ramifications on the region, on Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and so on and so forth. Netanyahu wanted to bomb Iran. He certainly thinks that its defenses have been destroyed from the last Israeli bombing last year of Iran. And he thinks this is a great opportunity with the help of the United States that Israel could, in fact, finish off fancifully or otherwise. But yes, as we've heard today, the big news is that the United States is involved or will be involved in direct negotiations at a higher level. And that is something that we're going to have to keep up or to keep an eye on in the weeks and months to come.
Yeah, Marwan, you make an important point because in the last few weeks, the last couple of months, we've heard on multiple occasions Trump threaten Iran with some type of retaliation if they don't come in line. And even during this, whether you want to call it a press conference or a press gaggle, this meeting that took place, at one point he said, if talks with Iran aren't successful, I think Iran will be in great danger. Of course, that seems to be an implied threat as well.
Check this out. I'm going to show you how I afforded this car.
Tonight, China hurled these new accusations at President Trump as it took action, bracing for a real trade slugfest. President Trump is now promising a new 50% tariff on China, on top of the other new tariffs, which are on top of existing tariffs. Combined, this would make U.S. tariffs on imports from China a whopping 104%. And yet, despite all this tough talk, the markets, they seem a little less agitated this morning. After days of these massive losses and trillions of dollars in value evaporated, U.S. stock futures are pointing up, for now at least. It comes, and it may be because of the fact that some members of his administration have relented on their no negotiation stance. Some members of the administration. The markets in Asia, you can see right there, most of them rebounded after their sharp sell-offs. This comes, though, as China accused the U.S. of blackmail, and China is vowing to, quote, fight to the end if the president moves ahead with all of his threats. So let's get right to CNN's Mark Stewart in Beijing here, because the rest of Asia is in a different place than China is right now, and China really seems to be gearing up for a serious fight.
Indeed, John, despite what the White House may want, China and Beijing is making it very clear that it's not going to budge. And once again today, we saw this shift from diplomatic language to something that's much more defiant. You brought up that phrase, mistake upon mistake. That is some of the language we heard today from China's Ministry of Commerce. And it's taking a very strong stance. In fact, it also went on to say that China will resolutely take countermeasures to to safeguard its own rights and interests. As far as what those countermeasures could be, we heard from a state media commentator who brought up the point that we could see more tariffs targeting agriculture, things like soybeans, which we know are so important to American farmers and the broader economy, even restricting or banning American films. We heard at a press briefing just about 4 hours ago from a spokesperson from China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The messaging there, very strong, very firm. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Pressure, threats, and blackmail are not the right ways to engage with China. If the U.S. disregards the interests of both countries and the international community, insists on launching a tariff or trade war, China will fight to the end.
جاي اخذ غداء من التكية لأنه الوضع عندنا في غزة بشكل عام كارثي صعب. أنا وضعي كمان غير وضع غزة، أنا وضعي تحت الصفر، ما فيش معي أقدر أوفر الحاجة من أي شيء من المستلزمات، واللي موجود غالي.
الحياة غالية، لا في أكل ولا في شرب ولا في شغل، يعني ما فيش حياة خالص. ما الواحد مش قادر يعني يدبر أمور الحياة والمعيشة، مش قادر يجيب الطبخة. لو بدك تجيب واحد طبخة بدها تكلفه تقريبا 60-70 شيكل، يعني لو بدك تشتغل دوبك تجيب 10-20 شيكل، هذا إذا لقيت شغل.
Organizers say millions of Americans took to the streets this past Saturday to protest President Donald Trump and his administration's actions on a number of key issues. Thousands of people attended several protests here in northern Minnesota. Our reporter Matthew Freeman has more details.
According to the Associated Press, over 1,200 hands-off demonstrations took place in all 50 states on Saturday, including multiple protests throughout the state of Minnesota.
Today we have more people showing up than we ever had in 6 years.
I was here in 2016 when we were protesting. This is probably the biggest crowd I've seen yet, and I expect that the crowds will continue to grow.
Reportedly, over 700 protesters picketed along the Central School in Grand Rapids. Another 1,000 took to the streets of Brainerd for their protest, and over 1,200 voiced their concerns in front of Paul and Babe in Bemidji.
It's our turn as citizens to take to the streets and really, show like we're not okay with what's happening.
It means people are pissed. There's a lot of energy. I've never seen anything like this.
The so-called hands-off demonstrations, organized by multiple activist groups, all centered around one common theme.
There have been a lot of interventions by Musk and Trump on things like Medicaid, Social Security, sound economic policy, grants that fund science, vaccine research, immigrant status, First Amendment rights. We still have due process in this country, and Trump and Musk can't take that away from us.
While Trump and Musk were the main focus across the country, protests in northern Minnesota also focused on U.S. House District 8 Representative Pete Stauber.
For the second time since January, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington, D.C. today to meet with President Trump as Israel expands its ground invasion of Gaza. According to the UN relief agency, UNRWA, Israeli attacks have killed or injured at least 100 children in Gaza every day since Israel broke the ceasefire in mid-March. This comes as Israel has killed at least 56 Palestinians over the past 24 hours. Overnight, Israel struck a tent housing journalists near Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. The blast set off a fire that killed 2 people, including the journalist Helmi al-Fakawi, who was burned alive. Another journalist, Hassan Aslaya, was seriously wounded in the attack. Meanwhile, outrage is growing over Israel's killing of 15 Palestinian medics and emergency workers in Gaza who were discovered in an unmarked mass grave last week. Footage recovered of the attack shows the ambulances in the convoy had their lights on when Israeli troops opened fire. Israel had initially claimed the convoy had suspiciously approached the troops with their lights off. Cell phone video of Israel's attack was recorded by a paramedic who was inside the vehicle when it came under fire, was among the 15 aid workers who were killed. That That's the sound of gunfire from Israeli soldiers. An Israeli military spokesperson said in a statement that its troops, quote, did not randomly attack an ambulance on March 23rd, and that, quote, following an initial assessment, it was determined the forces had eliminated Hamas military operative Mohammed Ibrahim Shubaki, who took part in the October 7th massacre, along with 8 other terrorists from Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, they said. Well, on Saturday, the longtime Palestinian politician and Dr. Mustafa Barghouti marched in a protest in Ramallah.
The Israeli army committed a terrible war crime by attacking first aid providers and medics in the Red Crescent Society while they were in their ambulances, clearly marked with their sirens on, with their lights on. Nevertheless, they attacked them and killed them one after the other. And after killing them, and maybe some of them were still wounded, they buried them with sand, they and their ambulances. What the Israeli army did in Rafah, and that's what New York Times have exposed, was a terrible war crime.
The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said the people were buried in a mass grave, with the ambulance also buried. Some of their bodies were found with their hands or legs tied and had gunshot wounds to the head and chest. This is Palestine Red Crescent Society Media Director Raed El-Nams addressing reporters Sunday.
These are considered crimes against humanity and war crimes. The international community must intervene to stop and compel Israel to respect international conventions and the rules of international humanitarian law, which prohibit the targeting of providers of health services and ambulances during war and conflict.
For more, we're joined by Diana Boutou, longtime Palestinian human rights attorney, former advisor to the negotiating team of the Palestine Liberation Organization. She has a new piece in Zateo headlined Point Blank Range, How Israel Executed 15 Medics and Rescue Workers in Gaza. Diana, welcome back to Democracy Now! Thanks for joining us from Haifa. If you can start off by giving us the chronology of what happened to the medics and the paramedics and the ambulance drivers, and what Israel first said, and then when the footage was taken from the cell phone of a dead paramedic, what then Israel has responded.
Well, what we know, Amy, is that the Israeli army attacked an area in Rafah, a neighborhood in Rafah, Tel al-Sultan. And as has been the case over the course of the past year and a half, today marks a year and a half of this genocide, just shows the height of dehumanization. It's high time that people wake up and realize that Israel's doing this for a reason, and they continue to get away with it because nobody is stopping them.
I want to also ask you about what happened in the occupied West Bank. Israeli soldiers shooting dead a 14-year-old Palestinian-American boy named Omar Mohammed Rabia during a raid of the town of Rumeysa. 2 other Palestinian-American boys, 14 and 15, were injured. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry condemned what it called the extrajudicial killing. Israel acknowledged shooting the boys. They accused them of rock throwing. Diana Boutou.
Yeah. Yes, this is, again, another example, Amy, of the levels of dehumanization and the fact that Israeli soldiers are given orders of shoot to kill. I don't think that that we should be living in a world in which 13, 14, 15-year-old children are condemned to death because they're trying to resist military occupation through a stone. And yet these are the instructions and the orders that the Israeli army has given to its soldiers, which is shoot and kill, and we will then provide cover for you forever. This is why we've never seen any Israeli soldiers be held to account for the killings of children, for the killings of journalists, for the killings of medics, and so on.
And then you have the situation of health officials saying 600,000 children in Gaza are at risk of permanent paralysis because Israel's barring the entry of polio vaccines to Gaza as part of its broader overall blockade. And according to UNRWA, Israeli attacks have killed or injured 100 children a day since Israel broke the ceasefire. Diana Butu, there were protests all over the country, including those protesting around Israel's war on Gaza and U.S. support for that war. Thousands marched in Washington in a separate protest outside the hands-off protest, and many joined the hands-off protest who felt this way. What do you think of the U.S. role and what the U.S. can do as Netanyahu meets with Trump?
The U.S. has been complicit, and it's been Israel's largest supplier. This isn't just an Israeli genocide against Palestinians. This is a U.S.-backed Israeli genocide against Palestinians. And the important part of this is that if you look at who makes up the Palestinian people, particularly in Gaza, more than 50% are children. More than 50% are under the age of 18. And when people talk about genocide, I think the element that is largely ignored is that we're not just talking about the number of people who are killed or the number of people who are injured. It's about the specific intent to try to kill off a group of people. When you deny them health care, when you deny them the ability to have access to medicine, as we're seeing with the polio vaccine, as we're seeing with the bombing of all 36 hospitals in the Gaza Strip, you can see the specific intent to commit and carry out genocide, to eliminate an entire group. And
Tonight, several breaking stories as we come on the air. The volatile day on Wall Street. President Trump is asked late today, will he pause his sweeping tariffs, and what he said. Also tonight, more than 20 dead. Severe storms hit multiple states. You'll see more than 60 people rescued from a hotel by boat. And the video right here tonight, the extinct wolf that scientists now say they've brought back, not seen in 10,000 years. First tonight, the Dow plunging 1,700 points in the opening minutes today, then the wild swings today. The false social media post suggesting President Trump would pause his tariffs, giving the markets false hope. The Dow then dropping again, and tonight our Mary Bruce asking the president if he's considering that pause for his tariffs, how he answers. You'll also hear from American families and farmers tonight concerned, and what J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon is now saying about the tariffs and what they'll do to inflation in the U.S. and the chances of recession here. Whit Johnson on Wall Street.
Attacking a well-prepared defense never ends well. This video proves it. Russian tanks and APCs are stopped by mines.
Monday allowed Donald Trump to pursue deportations of alleged Venezuelan gang members using a law dating back to 1798 with certain limits. Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act on March 15th to swiftly deport the alleged members of the Tren de Aragua gang. The law has historically been used only in wartime and is best known for its use to intern Japanese, Italian, and German immigrants during World War II. The same day, a Washington-based judge blocked the deportations, but Trump's administration allowed 2 planes already in the air to continue to El Salvador to be placed in the Central American country's terrorism confinement center. The administration has argued the judge had encroached on presidential authority to make national security decisions. On Monday, the Supreme Court granted the administration's request to lift the judge's order in an unsigned 5-4 ruling in which conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett and the court's 3 liberal justices dissented. However, the court's majority placed limits on how deportations may occur and emphasized that judicial review is required. The majority wrote that detainees, quote, must receive notice after the date of this order that they are subject to removal under the act, and that, quote, the notice must be afforded within a reasonable time and in such a manner as will allow them to actually seek habeas relief in the proper venue before such removal occurs. The ruling said the court was not resolving the validity of the administration's reliance on the law to carry out the deportations. The dissenting justices, in an opinion written by liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor, criticized the majority's, quote, dubious conclusions in the case and for acting with just a few days of deliberation. Lee Gallant, a lawyer with the American Civil Liberties Union and the lead counsel representing the detainees, framed the court's decision as a win for his side, saying, quote, the critical point is that the Supreme Court said individuals must be given due process to challenge their removal under the Alien Enemies Act. That is an important victory.
Democratic Republic of Congo's capital waded through floodwater to get to their homes on Monday after severe flooding killed dozens and left many more displaced. This is the living room, the sitting area, and everything, says local Prasad Nandu as she points out the extent of her home's damage. Nandu says she spent 72 hours trapped in the water with her family, unable to eat. We lost everything. We didn't recover anything, she says. Torrential rains over the weekend destroyed homes and roads, killing dozens in the capital, the provincial health minister said on Sunday. The Njili River, which runs through part of the city of around 17 million people, overflowed its banks on Friday night. It blocked the main national road, which left drivers stranded since Saturday evening. Local Dorcas Katumba described her neighborhood as a swimming pool and says people are under the water. Kinshasa's governor said water infrastructure had been affected, but that supply would be reinstated shortly. He blamed illegal housing for some of the deaths and threatened to evict people from unplanned settlements. The flooding comes at a vulnerable time for the Central African nation. Rwanda-backed M23 rebels have intensified an offensive in the country's turbulent east, with more than 7,000 people killed in the fighting in the first 2 months of the year.
Severe flooding continued across the U.S. Midwest and South after powerful spring storms killed more than a dozen people across multiple states. Drone footage showed extensive flood damage in Shepherdsville, Kentucky on Monday after the Salt River overflowed its banks, submerging the city's streets. At least 2 people died in Kentucky due to the deadly weather. Police said one of the dead was a 9-year-old boy walking to his school bus stop on Friday morning when he was overtaken by flooding. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear said record flooding had also closed more than 500 roads across the state and that rivers were still rising. A large swath of the U.S. stretching from Ohio to Texas was slammed by tornadoes and severe thunderstorms in the past week. Tornadoes were confirmed in at least 6 states, including Arkansas, Illinois, Mississippi, Missouri, Tennessee, and Kentucky. More than a dozen tornadoes touched down in Kentucky alone, injuring at least 8 people and knocking out power for hundreds of thousands.
And the water is just rushing so fast.
Residents who filmed heavy rainfall and rushing water in West Plains, Missouri on Friday were shocked by the scale of the storm. Independent nonprofit Climate Central, which researches weather patterns, said climate change is bringing heavier rainfall and related flood risks in most parts of the U.S., with the upper Midwest and Ohio River Valley among the regions most affected.
When it came time,
At around 3 a.m. at dawn, we woke up to an explosion next to us. We all got out of our tents and saw a targeting of our journalist colleague's tent. But we will continue to deliver the message and conveying the truth to the whole world. This is our humanitarian duty.
Ukrainians in the city of Kryvyi Rih were mourning on Saturday after deadly Russian attacks the day before. 9 children were among at least 19 people killed in President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown, according to local officials. It was one of Moscow's deadliest this year in the conflict.
Burying children is the worst thing there is. It shouldn't happen. Whatever the Russians are writing about us, calling us Nazis, the idiots should look at themselves.
A missile hit a residential area, killing 18 people and sparking fires, according to the region's governor. Authorities said Russian drones later attacked homes and killed another person. Officials also said the strikes left dozens hospitalized, including a 3-month-old baby. Russia's defense ministry said it had targeted a military gathering and denied attacking civilians. The Ukrainian military denounced Moscow's statement as misinformation. Meanwhile, an industrial facility in Russia's Volga River region of Mordovia was hit by drone strikes on Saturday. Reuters was able to verify the location of the eyewitness video, but not the date it was taken, though the region's governor confirmed the incident on Telegram without naming the facility. Media reports said it was a fiber optic factory. It came as Moscow accused Ukraine of stepping up strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, saying there had been 6 attacks over the past 24 hours. Reuters was unable to verify the reports of the strikes. Ukraine's military said Moscow's reports were fake and that its forces were only striking military targets. The two sides agreed last month to a US proposal to halt strikes on each other's energy infrastructure for 30 days. Both have since repeatedly accused each other of violating the deal.
162 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Dominic Calverwell, reporting to you from Kiev. Anna is off this week, so I will be taking you through the top stories from Ukraine. A quick note before we begin. Last month we introduced a new segment in which members of the Kiev independent community can submit questions to be answered at the end of each episode. As more and more Russians are sent home in coffins, the Kremlin has turned to financial incentives to attract new members, with a $21,000 sign-up bonus. Moscow also streamlined the conscription service to make it easier to draft men, including those that previously evaded service. Although Russia continues to engage in peace negotiations with the US, its actions show anything but a readiness to shift the country off its war-bound track. For our member question this week, we have this from Americans alike. Are both growing weary of Putin delaying the peace process? Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal are leading a bill that would impose a 500% tariff on countries buying Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other key exports. The bill has yet to be passed, but
China has launched large-scale war exercises around the self-ruled island of Taiwan. The Chinese Army, Navy and Air Force sent planes and 19 warships to surround Taiwan in a drill aimed at practicing a total air and sea blockade of the territory. Beijing said the exercises are meant to send a stern warning to Taiwan, which it considers part of China. Taiwan is accusing China of being the world's biggest troublemaker. Let's bring in Katrina Yu. She's live for us now from Beijing. So, Katrina, what have we been hearing from China about all this?
Well, China says that this is a joint operation between its Army, Navy and Air Force, that it is using its newest aircraft carrier, the Shandong, and it is basically gathering around the island of Taiwan. And the goal here, it's made very clear, is to practice and prepare for a potential invasion of the island, territory that Beijing considers its own. It says that its goals are to practice seizing territory, striking air and land targets, and taking comprehensive control and forming a blockade against the island. And as a result, we've seen Taiwan's military scramble its own fighter jets in response. So it is a very tense situation there. Now, why is Beijing doing this now? Well, China says that this is a firm warning against Taiwan's democratically elected government and its leader, Lai Ching-te, a leader that Beijing considers a separatist and therefore a troublemaker. Beijing has been repeatedly calling Lai a parasite, and it wants to send a very clear message that any independence would mean war with Beijing. Now, we had in March 13, Lai Ching-te give a press conference where he referred to China as a foreign hostile force, and that infuriated China. And Lai Ching-te was talking about how Beijing has been ramping up its military exercises against the island, and that is true. We had two similar major military drills undertaken by Beijing's PLA last year, one in May, another in October, and pretty much every month it's been sending its air force to scramble fighter jets around Taiwan. The message has been intimidation, and these are being considered incursions by Taiwan's military. And And in addition to these exercises, we've had a flurry of propaganda material being released, videos and posters referring to Lai again as a parasite. And the theme of a lot of this propaganda has been closing in on the enemy. So here, it's really about intimidation of Taiwan.
What the small businesses want more than anything else is some certainty and some predictability and some opportunity to plan. And this Trump approach on tariffs doesn't give them that. Now, if they were looking at a targeted tariff, which I've supported in the past, that'd be different. But that's not what they're doing.
Again, but to go back to my previous question of if this does force some countries to negotiate, isn't that a positive outcome? You have already seen outreach from Japan. The Treasury Secretary says he'll be speaking with them. You've seen outreach from Vietnam to reduce some of their restrictions. The EU has offered to go to zero tariffs on cars and other auto parts. Would that be a positive outcome?
Of course, anything that puts dollars into the pockets of our small businesses and families is something I'll be for. But you look at the track record of this administration thus far, and that has not been the result.
What message are you getting from the White House? Have you tried to get answers, specific answers on this policy? And what answers will you try to get from the U.S. Trade Representative today?
Well, today what we want to know is what they're going to do and why, and how specifically what they're doing is actually going to help our small businesses and our people. They've made lots of promises, but no follow through, and that's what we're going to try to pin them down on this morning.
What's the end game, do you think, for this administration? What do you truly think that President Trump is trying to do here?
I believe what the president is trying to do is break the current system for trade. It's got a lot of flaws, but for example, I'd like to see us fix the tax code, for example, make it more attractive for American businesses to have opportunities here, and I think that would help without the downside.
What tariffs would you support?
I support a targeted approach, John. This across-the-board approach is what I call economic poison because it just hits so many communities in a helter-skelter kind of way. If you go in a targeted kind of fashion, bring in business groups and labor groups and community leaders and actually zero in on a specific result, that's what's worked in the past. That's what I'm for in the future.
All right, Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, we look forward to listening to this hearing today. Thanks for your time this morning. Kate?
This morning, CNN has new reporting on the growing fear among public health experts that anti-vaccine sentiment within the government could derail some of the nation's latest vaccines that are still waiting for FDA approval. CNN's Jacqueline Howard has this new reporting for us, and she's joining us right now. Jacqueline, which vaccines are we talking about here?
Kate, well, public health experts are watching this closely, and we know of two vaccines from Moderna that are awaiting FDA action. One of those vaccines is Moderna's next generation COVID-19 vaccine. We hear from the company that the FDA is expected to make a decision on that vaccine by May 31st. Moderna's other vaccine is its combination flu and COVID shot. So as you know, Kate, we typically have to get a separate COVID shot and a separate flu shot, but this is a vaccine that combines protection against both COVID and flu in a single jab. Moderna already applied for FDA approval of this vaccine. We're not quite sure when the agency may make a decision on that particular vaccine, but if approved, this would be the first ever combination flu and COVID shot here in the United States. Now, the reason why public health experts are watching both of these vaccines closely is because just last week, Novavax applied for full approval of its COVID-19 vaccine. The FDA delayed action on that. So public health experts are waiting to see, okay, will there be another delay with Moderna's vaccine? That's something to watch in May.
And the FDA's now former forced to resign top vaccine regulator, Dr. Peter Marks, has come out since his resignation saying that the Novavax vaccine, that was on a glide path to approval, that everyone involved had basically said that was going to be approved. Have we heard any reason for why it now is delayed?
Well, that's right, Kate. We've been using this vaccine. It's available under emergency use authorization. So that's why experts expected the approval process to go smoothly. But what we heard is that the FDA is still seeking more data on the vaccine. That's what we were told. But again, this vaccine has been under emergency use authorization. Novavax now wants full approval. We're waiting to see what will happen. Keep in mind, Novavax's COVID vaccine was the first COVID-19 vaccine to come up for action under this second Trump administration. That's why public health experts are watching this closely, because this is the first delay that we're seeing right now. And there are concerns, worries, and fears that there could be more delays in the future, Kate.
Yeah, concerns, worries, and fears that everyone's worst fears of what RFK Jr. would be putting in place as HHS secretary could be coming true. That's what the concern is, and that's where obviously everyone has to watch very closely. Thank you for staying on top of it, Jacqueline. Coming up for us, you need to know as you're about to be heading to the grocery store and could see a jump in price there. Also, more than 12,000 years after becoming extinct, scientists have brought a certain type of wolf back to life. The project, and then of course Barbara, and you know, quite a few of these subjects initially said no, but persistence. But we were able to sort of re-explain the project and sort of walk them through the simplicity of it and the potential of it, and they ended up saying yes. So obviously Barbara and Liza, and I mean so many. Everybody was a get in their own right, for sure.
Yeah. Mark, did you have a favorite? Did you have one that when you said, "Oh my God, we're going to get Barbara, or we're going to get Liza," or what?
Yeah, I mean, I thought those were still, when we set out on the project, I thought those were still pretty far away from us obtaining. But the minute that I worked with Joel Gray, the incredible joy and excitement and just overall experience of working with him, I said, I've got to get to work and make sure that every one of these is a gem. And that's the way I felt. It was, my approach to photography is that I have to think about it as if it's the last time I'm going to have an opportunity to work with an artist. Yeah. And if I don't walk away with that one image, then, bad on me. So I just approach it like that, and everybody just came through for me. And it was just historic in terms of my own history of documentation. It was just a real wonderful journey.
And you also got 2 EGOT winners. That would be Whoopi Goldberg and Rita Moreno, the great Rita Moreno. So, I mean, just incredible. The yesteryear edition of New York Magazine is available online and in print now. Director of Photography, Jody Kwan, and photographer Mark Seliger. Thank you both very much for sharing this with us this morning. Take care. Thank you. All right, up next, we'll take a look at how the markets are.
The White House for how to come and negotiate. So, I would say that the negotiations are the result of the massive inflow of inbound calls to come and negotiate. Had nothing to do with the market. I think there's going to be a lot of back and forth. President Trump is going to be personally involved in the negotiations. And we will see what our trading partners offer. Many of our trading partners, they have queued up, and they have kept their cool. They have not escalated, and they will get priority in the queue. I think it was a big mistake, this Chinese escalation, because they're playing with a pair of twos.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent speaking with CNBC a short while ago, saying the Trump administration is open to negotiating deals to reduce tariffs, while denying the market sell-off has led the White House to alter its approach. Welcome to the 4th hour of Morning Joe at 6 a.m. on the West Coast, 9 a.m. in the East Coast. By the way, that point of view is consistent with what Bessent has said two others. Along with Joe, Jonathan Lemire, and me, we have special correspondent at Vanity Fair and host of the Fast Politics podcast, Molly Jong-Fast. She's an MSNBC political analyst, and New York Times opinion columnist David French joins us as well. So as we listen to what the Treasury Secretary has to say, the futures market is on the rise this morning with all signs pointing to a higher opening in about half an hour. This comes after 3 straight days of declines, with several top Wall Street leaders now warning of a potential recession. NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans has more.
After another chaotic day on Wall Street, America's CEOs are sounding the alarm, warning that the U.S. economy could soon take a big hit after President Trump's sweeping tariff announcement sent markets spinning.
The economy is weakening as we speak. Most CEOs I talk to would say we are probably in a recession right now.
A new CNBC survey showing those concerns are widespread, with 69% of CEOs expecting a recession and 82% expecting resurgent inflation. The Dow swinging 2,600 points Monday, the most ever in a single day, closing down more than 300. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon telling shareholders the situation is one large additional straw on the camel's back. Pershing Square CEO Bill Ackman, a Trump supporter, warning we're heading for a self-induced economic nuclear winter. And Virgin's Richard Branson tweeting yesterday, this is the moment to own up to a colossal mistake and change course. Otherwise, America will face ruin for years to come. But despite those fears, President Trump not backing down.
We're going to get fair deals and good deals with every country, and if we don't, we're going to have nothing to do with them.
Some consumers already rethinking the way they buy.
I take a lot of hand-me-downs, and we also go to the dollar store.
One retail group estimating sneakers made in places like Vietnam could soon cost Americans an additional $50 to $75 more per pair. And now Nintendo announcing a delay of its highly anticipated gaming system.
I'm not spending $600 on a Nintendo Switch 2.
The National Association of Wine Retailers also bracing for fallout, with wines from Europe set to be taxed at 20%.
So let's bring in right now the co-anchor of CNBC Squawk Box and New York Times columnist Andrew Ozturk. Andrew wrote this morning that these tariffs may be, quote, rewiring the markets. Andrew, of course, yesterday we started seeing toward the end of the day the markets going up, coming down, but recovering, and for the most part, leveling out. Today, of course, stock futures much stronger. And so we can't predict what everybody in that report was saying. Is there going to be a recession? Is there going to be inflation? It does seem, though, at least for today, the markets have found enough of a bottom for now. Again, this could all change tomorrow with what the president does or doesn't say, that it does provide a little bit more political space for the White House to negotiate.
Look, I think what's happening here is a sense that there's going to be some form of a negotiation. Of course, the president says no negotiation, and yet then we just talked to the Treasury Secretary this morning saying there will be a negotiation. Of course, the president hinting maybe there could be negotiations. What does that really look like? I think you have almost different camps talking out of this administration that's confusing the market. You have a Peter Navarro on one side of the situation saying there should be no negotiation. This is all about getting manufacturing back to the United States and creating revenue. Similar Howard Lutnick in that camp. And then you have, the Treasury Secretary and possibly people like Elon Musk saying, that there should be a negotiation and the goal should be to get tariffs down to zero. Of course, all of those things are at odds. And of course, the only true decider in the end is going to be President Trump. You do have a market right now that thinks that there will be a deal. Having said that, I think that the chance of any kind of deal soon is almost impossible. It's very hard to think about how a deal comes together quickly, given how many countries are ultimately going to be involved. This could play out potentially for months. One of the things that the Treasury Secretary said earlier this morning, though, that was fascinating is some of these quote-unquote deals may not be about tariffs at all. Some of them may be about VAT taxes. Some of them could be about providing investment in energy. In Alaska, for example, he was talking about whether South Korea and Japan could get together to help with energy production and exporting energy out of Alaska to create jobs. So all of this could turn into some kind of, different chess pieces. And, then TikTok, another chess piece for China. So I think it's going to be very hard to see what happens anytime soon. As a result of all of that, there is going to be remarkable uncertainty and therefore remarkable volatility.
Well, it's interesting, Andrew. You talk about how the administration seems to be split. Obviously, Peter Navarro, Stephen Miller, Howard Lutnick, strongly in support of tariffs. You brought up Elon Musk, who has been grousing privately to people close to him how dangerous these tariffs are and what negative impact it's having on Tesla. I mean, he's beyond himself, according to my reporting. And you also have Scott Bessent, clearly uncomfortable, and also letting some people on Wall Street know how uncomfortable he is with the situation he was put in this weekend. But this morning he gets to go out, tell you, hey, this is all about doing the deal, which is what it was what he said from the very beginning. But of course, the interesting thing is, it doesn't really matter what any of those people think. It doesn't matter what any of those people say. It's one person who's making these decisions, right?
It's one person, and that person, and we've talked about it so many times, I think ideologically ultimately does believe in tariffs, ultimately does believe that there should be a restructuring of the economy in a meaningful way. So as much as he may want to negotiate, I think it's very hard to believe that 6 months, a year from now, longer than that, there will not be tariffs or that somehow we'll get to zero. Right. I would imagine, given that he's already created this baseline of 10%, maybe that is a form of a tax, but both on the American public and on foreign countries across the board. And maybe that's a forever situation. The thing right now is that the business community just wants some certainty so they can figure out what they are supposed to do about this. Are they going to wait it out and try to see whether the courts block this, whether the Republicans lose in the midterms? What happens 4 years from now? I mean, that's the big question right now, because as long as they're not doing anything and they're paralyzed, it effectively means that you're going to have job creation problems, investment problems. Folks out in the public are going to say, am I going to go buy stuff? Am I going to make a big investment in a house or car or this or that? I mean, it just sort of puts everybody in a state of paralysis.
But, Andrew, where were these people over the past year? Forget the past year. Where have they been since 1987? People have known Donald Trump in New York for decades. This has always been. We played a clip earlier today, and I said, for all the disinformation that you hear about Donald Trump and all the disinformation coming from his quarters, from X, from wherever, what he said this morning, or what he said yesterday, that we played this morning, strip it down. That is the essence of Donald Trump's ideology. When he says, I'm the only guy that will do this. I only have he believes he has a year, maybe 2 years to get things done. I mean, he believes that. He knows that he's standing alone on this island, believing he's the only one who will do this, because he is. And I know you're just flabbergasted because you deal with them every day, but we're just rolling our eyes at these billionaires from Wall Street that supported Donald Trump that are shocked that gambling's going on in the restaurant.
And the reason that they're shocked is because, I don't think they spent enough time focused on his words over these last 30 years as it relates to tariffs. But there's another piece to this, which is that President Trump has always been focused on his, or at least historically, on his own approval, his own ratings, right? What were the ratings of The Apprentice? Was he number one? In the first administration, they would talk about the stock market as a measure of their success. And I think so many of the members of the business community looked at that and effectively put blinders on to this other piece of the president, which is his interest, a genuine interest in tariffs and in fundamentally changing the narrative and structure of our global economy.
All right, CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin, thank you so much. We will be talking to you soon, keeping an eye on everything. The U.S. Supreme Court is letting President Trump pursue the deportations of a Venezuelan migrant under a rarely invoked wartime law, but only after judicial review. All 9 justices concluded that Venezuelan migrants filed their challenge to the Alien Enemies Act in the wrong jurisdiction, and also acknowledged potential deportees must get due process. They continued that the migrants should have filed their cases in Texas, where they were being detained before the deportation flights, rather than in Washington.
David French, that really does play right into your latest column for the New York Times, and it's titled, "Don't Roll Your Eyes at Due Process," talking about this Venezuelan migrants who were deported last month to a prison in El Salvador. And you write in part, all of the deportees are now suffering in prison conditions that if they were found stateside would violate the 8th Amendment of the Constitution. The defense of civil liberties is hard, even under the best of circumstances. Thousands of years of human history tell us that we are not naturally inclined to protect the rights of our opponents, much less the rights of people we believe to be violent and dangerous. That's why the defense of the Bill of Rights requires both practical and moral arguments. The practical defense is often the most effective. Protect the rights of others that you would like to exercise yourself. After all, one day you might not be in control. So David, I'm curious what your takeaway was from the Supreme Court ruling, because I will just say, as is often the case, I read the headlines in newspapers and hear what people are saying on TV, and it doesn't bear any resemblance to what actually happened. I think the takeaway from the ruling last night was that all 9 justices say that people who are going to be deported have to be, 1, put on notice, and 2, have their day in court. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was very strange to me to see the administration out there trumpeting this as some giant win, when in reality they had been saying for day after day after day, due process is no due process for illegal aliens, no due process, no due process. Meanwhile, in court, their lawyers were quietly acknowledging, yeah, we probably have to provide some due process. And then 9 justices say you have to provide due process. And even more than that, they also said, look, these proceedings you'll be able to challenge whether the Alien Enemies Act was even properly invoked. So it was very strange for me to see the administration trumpeting this as some big win when the justices were saying that people get hearings, they get due process, they get notice, and they're going to have an opportunity to challenge the application of the act itself. So this was not a blank check for the administration by any stretch of the imagination at all. Exactly. It was exactly the opposite of that.
So, David, I think that's a really good point and smart reading of this, which we've been trying to hammer this morning. But let's go big picture here. There still seems to be some rhetoric, at the very least, for the administration about defying court orders, about taunting, about this alleged victory. And, potentially we heard from President Trump over the weekend suggesting that, well, maybe we'd even send American citizens who are locked up down to El Salvador, take them up on their offer to house our prisoners. So let's take a step back. Give us your thoughts about what may still be coming, which is this bigger collision over the rule of law.
Well, I think all of that rhetoric was an indication that this was not going to be the case that was going to be the collision. They're trumpeting it as a victory and not really contesting the actual outcome itself. So that's an indication to me that this is sort of the way Trump backs down, declaring what is a defeat, a victory, and then we'll see about compliance. But the indication is they are not choosing this for that ultimate confrontation. We already see challenges to tariffs working up in the courts. We'll see how that goes because, both immigration and tariffs have been things that Trump has been talking about for decades. They're the few areas of consistency with him. And so what we might see is in those core areas, will he comply in those core areas? That's what I'm so curious about.
So David, let's talk about the second part of the issue, because there is no doubt that while the White House may be trumpeting these decisions as wins, their attorneys are clearly going back saying, hey, if we challenge this head on, we're going to lose 9-0. So from now on, any deportations, we have now been put on notice by all 9 justices. I mean, this reminds me of the 8-0 vote against Nixon back in '74. All 9 justices are saying you have to provide notice, you have to provide due process. So the court is very clear on what has to happen moving forward. Talk about the stay that Chief Justice Roberts gave, which again, in the other case about getting the gentleman, the migrant who was improperly deported to El Salvador, and of course, as we've been saying this morning, as Lisa Rubin said earlier, a stay is actually a reasonable, rational thing to do when you have an 11:59 p.m. deadline. Right. You have a stay, so the court has 2, 3, 4 days to really think about all the legal issues here. This is a trickier question. So what does the Supreme Court do? What can the Supreme Court do in their rulings on requiring the United States to figure out a way to get that gentleman back, as well as others who have been now, we find, deported improperly?
I find it difficult to believe that the Supreme Court will say of the people who've already been deported, oh, well, our bad. Right. They should have gotten due process. They didn't, too bad. I could imagine that what you will see is the Supreme Court ordering the Trump administration to do all that is feasible for it to facilitate the return. So the Supreme Court doesn't have jurisdiction over the government of El Salvador. It has jurisdiction over the United States government. And the idea that the United States government now has no influence and no say over what's happening in El Salvador here is just absurd. It's utterly absurd. And so I do not think you're going to see the Supreme Court abandon those folks who are in El Salvador who are not given due process on the grounds of, oh, too late. I just don't know what kind of relief we'll see the Supreme Court fashion. Now, I could be totally shocked and the Supreme Court surprise us all in that regard, but it would be a shock. It would be a deep surprise. And so I think in a few days, we might see the administration starting to change its tune about this big victory if now the people already in El Salvador are going to have an opportunity to contest their confinement.
Well, and again, a 9-0 victory. I mean, a 9-0 defeat. You just can't spin that as a victory. I wanted to ask you one more thing. I keep needing to get to John Lemire, but I keep having these questions that come up because what happened yesterday is so fascinating. Again, for people that woke up and read the headlines on major news sites, they've been given the completely wrong impression on what the court actually ruled. So that's one of the reasons why we're underlining this so much. But I read a fascinating article about Judge, I'm sorry, how do you pronounce his name? Boasang, the district court judge? Boasberg in D.C.?
Boasberg. Yes.
Read a fascinating article about him that the White House also may be picking on the wrong guy. I don't know if you read the article. This guy was roommates with Justice Kavanaugh. He has been seen as just an absolute bulwark against extremism on both sides in D.C. I won't say a legend among legal circles, among conservative Washington attorneys and jurists, but he's had a real feeder system to some of the best conservative justices in all of D.C. So when we hear that he's this radical left winger, that certainly has to make even the conservative justices on the Supreme Court roll their eyes and go, give me a break. And again, I just want our viewers to know this guy that the administration loathes right now is like a conservative legend inside of Washington, D.C. legal circles, including on the Supreme Court.
Well, he's a very, very, very respected judge. There's no question about it. And I'd also say, Joe, as a general rule, when you know federal judges, as a general rule, they are not the types to be easily intimidated. If you look at the 9 Supreme Court justices, these are not the types of people who are easily intimidated. Your median federal appellate judge, not easily intimidated. And so I think you'll see in the judicial branch, and you've already seen in the judicial branch, a lot more of a firm response to the Trump administration than you've seen really anywhere else, certainly more so than in Congress. And part of this is these judges are independent almost by disposition and nature. And unlike Congress, where when pressure is put on them, Congress is yielding every time. There's just no similar track record of these judges and justices yielding when pressure is put on them. So I'm not surprised at all that all 9 justices here said the obviously correct thing, that due process is a right here. So I think people should be encouraged. The judiciary is far more independent and strong than what they see out of Congress. Now, the big question is going to be, will there be that ultimate collision between the president and the judiciary? But I have confidence the judiciary is going to do its job.
An important conversation there. New York Times opinion columnist David French. David, thank you as always. His latest piece is available to read online now. And just on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about how this issue and many others are animating the protest movement across the country. Molly Jung-Fast got into that in her new piece. That'll be next. Also coming up, we'll take a look at some of the other stories making headlines this morning, including the possible revival of an animal that's been extinct for more than 10,000 years. We'll tell you.
We'll ever see in the market. And let's just jump right in. This is BlackRock chief Larry Fink. He says, hey, I'm talking to CEOs. They see a recession. Let's see what he has to say here.
Right now, areas that in my mind in the short run are very inflationary and destabilizing the economy. And that's what we've been talking about. But if we can find ways of rebuilding growth through these agendas, and then, you know, as I said at the beginning, the market declines. We're going to look back and say this might be a good entry level to get back into the market.
Are we headed for a recession? Are we in a recession?
Most CEOs I talk to would say we are probably in a recession right now.
Right now?
Right now. A couple of airline CEOs told me, one CEO specifically said, the airline industry is like a proverbial bird in a coal mine, canary in the coal mine, and I was told that the canary is sick already. If you look at what's going on in air traffic and how people are changing and how so many people who, like Canadians, who are not coming to the United States, we're seeing in various different sectors a real downturn.
So I guess the canary is sick. And again, he's saying he thinks we're in a recession already. Trump made things worse. He tweeted out, it is a threat to China. I told you guys in the prior video, I guess we're raising tariffs again, another 50% or something. It's hard to know exactly what their math is. They just seem to be making stuff up on the fly, which I'll show you in a minute here. But evidently, China has, I guess, till tomorrow. It's like this crazy ultimatum. I mean, how do you make business with something like that? On top of that, you got Bessent out there. He's been talking and touting a bunch of deals. I want to show you, though, a little bit of what they've said so you understand that these guys basically just lie and make crap up. So here's Bessent saying, I'm not going to be a part of any deals. I'm not in a deal. Just have a listen. You'll see what I'm saying.
Plans for conversations or a trip to Beijing?
Nothing imminent.
When it comes to this negotiation, April 9th, these tariffs come in place. Do you plan on having negotiations before that date?
Again, I'm not part of the negotiations, so we'll see.
So then he was saying he's not part of negotiations. We'll see. Now watch this.
And if countries retaliate, which some have said that they would, some have said they wanted to wait and see, what is the White House's response going to be to those countries?
Well, Caitlin, one of the messages that I'd like to get out tonight is everybody sit back, take a deep breath, don't immediately retaliate. Let's see where this goes, because if you retaliate, that's how we get escalation.
Right? Now he's talking about escalation. First says, I'm not part of any deal. Don't retaliate. I want to talk about escalation. And now he's going to start bragging about a bunch of trade deals. Watch this. This is today.
Larry, I can tell you that there are 50, 60, maybe almost 70 countries.
Now, if you listen to what he's saying, he's just kind of making stuff up. There's 50, 60, maybe even 70 countries that are talking to us. Like that's the kind of stuff that they're just making stuff up. I mean, I'm just watch this.
Larry, I can tell you that there are 50, 60, maybe almost 70 countries now who have approached us. So it's going to be a busy April, May, maybe into June.
Used to be alive. dire wolves went extinct more than 10,000 years ago. Meanwhile, there is another Jurassic Park sequel coming out this summer.
Yeah, no, when you said that an extinct like species came back to life, I thought you were talking about Rafi Devers. I mean,
he has been there.
I'm good with him coming back to life, but not these wolves. This is 10,000 too. It's like, you know. Like, you don't know what's going to happen there, John. Like, did they not save Jurassic Park?
Deeply problematic. Deeply problematic. And in a lesson learned here.
Speaking of deeply problematic, go ahead.
I was going to. The segue here could either be deeply problematic or it could be close encounters with wildlife, because former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson got a little too up close and personal with some while on vacation in Texas.
No, don't do that.
This video here was posted to social media by his wife. That's an ostrich. That's an ostrich sticking its head through the window of the family car and indeed pecking Boris Johnson.
That's hilarious.
We can't show this enough. Many times. It was likely taken at a wildlife park about an hour south of Fort Worth, where visitors can drive through a preserve that has hundreds of rare and endangered animals roaming free. Soon enough, some extinct animals will join that group, also attack former British prime ministers.
I mean, where do you put this, like, you know, in best Boris Johnson videos?
Do that.
Yeah, except Boris Johnson doesn't.
Of course it would be Boris
Don't open your window.
I think you put this.
They peck at the window.
So, John, where do you put this on? You got the ostrich pecking.
Politician tricks.
And then you've got the zip line, where he got stuck above London in the zip line. That was another good moment, right?
Yeah, the zip line would be tough to be topped, but this is pretty good. This is pretty good. The ostrich lunging through the car window in the most predictable thing that could ever happen to former Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
Okay.
And now, for something completely different.
Molly John Fast, you took a look at the deeper meaning behind this past weekend's Trump-Musk protests in your latest piece entitled, "Trump is Back, So Are Millions of Protesters." You know, Molly, a lot of people in this last cycle, election cycle, were like, enough with the protests. But what did you learn?
So, well, first of all, the scale of these protests cannot be underestimated. 1,200, at least 1,200 protests in many different cities, you know, states that you don't necessarily tend to see a ton of protests, like Alaska, Alabama, you know, really just everywhere. And they weren't like top-down protests. They weren't just in D.C. They were in the communities where these people live, which I think is really important. And remember, the House of Representatives is up, right? All these people are running for re-election in less than 2 years. And these are people from different congressional districts. I think really important. And, you know, in fact, the scale is almost as big as I think it's around the size of the Women's March, and the interest is as big as was in the 2020 protests, except that everything is peaceful.
Yeah, you know, earlier this morning on our shows, I mean, huge crowds there. But when we were talking to Jim Messina, he talked about Democratic enthusiasm. You look at some of the votes that have taken place in some of the elections over the past couple of weeks. But enthusiasm really is what both sides look at. The Trump campaign kept saying during the campaign, our voters are more enthusiastic. The Democratic voters, they ended up being more enthusiastic than Democratic voters. But here you are starting to see, as Jim Messina says, enthusiasm starting to really surge on the Democratic side. I'm wondering, was there a specific issue that drove most of these protests, or was it more general?
So I think there are two really important things. So these protests were about hands off, right? The sort of movement against Musk, against the war on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, there are real things that these Republicans want to cut that Americans don't like. And that is not necessarily a partisan issue, right? Cutting these things and firing nonpartisan government workers actually is bringing sort of more of a nonpartisan group to protest, though this was largely Democrats. I also do think it's worth remembering that this is about protecting norms and institutions as much as anything, and that is a game of inches and not feet. And with the experts I talked to on this, they said that always these kind of things actually really do matter.
Yeah, and these protests not limited to big cities. I saw one in a small town in New Jersey. I'd been there for a youth baseball tournament, not far actually from President Trump's Bedminster Golf Club. Former Ohio Governor John Kasich has been patiently standing by as we talk about Jurassic Park, extinct wolves, and ostriches. We'll get to him next on some other issues. Plus, CNBC's Dom Chu is also...
I can tell you that there are 50, 60, maybe almost 70 countries now who have approached us. So it's going to be a busy April, May, maybe into June. And Japan is a very important military ally. They're very important.
All right, so they go on and they say like Japan is front in line, but you want to know who's actually first in line that was actually meeting with Trump today? We talked about it yesterday. Here it is right now. Israel. Israel's already at the White House. They're first in line. According to Besant, it's 50, 60, maybe even 70 countries are on the phone. This is what we're dealing with. And again, Israel's there already. So let's listen to what Israel has to say.
I said to the president a very simple thing. We will eliminate the trade deficit with the United States. We intend to do it very quickly. We think it's the right thing to do. And we're going to also eliminate trade barriers, a variety of trade barriers that have been put up unnecessarily.
Okay, so kind of what's going on here, and a lot of it doesn't make sense, but that's a lot of what Trump and all these people are saying. They just make stuff up. So are we saying now Israel's just going to be buying tons and tons of stuff from USA? Is that our plan? I mean, like Israel's much smaller than USA. If I had to bet, though, the way that they'll probably play this out is Trump will start selling arms to Israel. That's one way that you could do it. I'm just telling you that theoretically that would be a way. But this idea, though, that suddenly Israel's just buying like even more stuff to make up whatever imbalance that they have. And then, they also say that Israel is going to be an example to the rest of the world. That's what he says right here. I'll show you what I'm saying.
And I think Israel can serve as a model for many countries who ought to do the same.
See? And I just want you guys to see what's going on. On top of that, now, what is the model? What is the model? So I guess theoretically the model is if you want to do business with Trump, buy a whole bunch of U.S. weapons, and then help Trump build his hotels and casinos in your country. I'm pretty sure that's what the play is. I've told you guys before. That's what Trump's up to with, say, Vietnam, with Saudi Arabia, making business dealings to benefit his family. Trump's all about Trump first, right? It's not America first, it's Trump first. Have a listen to this. It gets even more wild. And I don't want to make any jokes or anything of stuff. It's actually quite serious and sad. He talks about Gaza, you'll see.
To get to a deal, and do you think blocking humanitarian aid is also an effective pressure?
Well, you know how I feel about the Gaza Strip. I think
the markets have just opened and are rebounding this morning after a 3-day sell-off fueled by President Trump's tariffs.
Let's bring in right now CNBC senior market correspondent Dom Chu. Hey, Dom, you look at what happened in the Asian markets overnight. Nikkei, Europe up close. I think the last time I checked was close to 2%. It's looking right now. It's looking good. You don't want to predict anything with this as volatile as the markets have been, but it seems to me they've been so desperate for any good news to stop the bleeding. They heard the president in the Netanyahu press conference yesterday talking about negotiations, and Scott Bessent this morning, the Treasury Secretary, on Squawk Box, saying, "Hey, we're going to get really good deals out of this." And they've followed this. So talk about what you're hearing on Wall Street about why there's the big rebound and whether people think this may be the bottom.
All right, so I don't know if I haven't spoken to anybody, Joe Mika, that is calling this a bottom with any kind of certainty. No one's saying mission accomplished yet, but it's certainly a reprieve. Now, the Dow over the last 3 days prior has lost roughly, call it 4,200 points, right? So you're talking about a 1,000-point gain so far this morning. It's a fraction of what we lost in the last 3 days, but it's a reprieve, and it's a welcome one for anyone that owns stocks. Frankly, anyone that is worried about the prospects for the U.S. economy. Again, not sure anyone really believes this has changed fundamentally anything with regard to the tariff conversation or trade conversation from last week. What it does do, though, what we are getting and seeing is that markets are still very volatile. They're moving sharply lower or higher, as we can see here, given anything incremental to, as you point out, on the news front. Now, it could also be very well be that there's an expectation building that something positive could happen on the trade front sometime in the near future. Business leaders, billionaires who've lost, again, a lot of their net worth in the last 3 days, they're starting to get more vocal about what the policies are like. not necessarily that it'll sway really the only one who really matters in this process, who is President Trump himself. But when you've got prominent hedge fund managers like Ken Griffin, Stanley Druckenmiller, Bill Ackman, amongst others, also billionaire Republican mega donor Ken Langone, each of those guys coming out in some way, shape, or form against how tariff policies are currently playing out, there's at least some incremental optimism that policies are going to be evaluated and may be adjusted. There was also, by the way, a lack of clarity on whether or not there was room for negotiation. As you point out, earlier this morning, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent basically said that negotiations that are taking place are happening with some of these calls that have been coming into the White House. So, again, remember, just the Magnificent Seven stocks alone, guys, lost around $1.8 trillion in 3 days. So there's a sense right now that they can't just go down in a straight line like that.
CNBC's Dom Chu, thank you so much. And I think we should note that slight change in rhetoric here from the White House, now focusing on negotiations from the Treasury Secretary and also the president, who just posted on Truth Social a few moments ago about negotiations with South Korea, saying a team is en route to Washington now, and that he was hopeful of getting a deal done potentially as soon as today. So we'll have to see. But that seems to be that's a sense of where the market might be driving a little bit of its optimism. So as we mentioned, former Republican governor of Ohio, John Kasich, is here. He was a 2016 presidential candidate. We're also happy to say he's an MSNBC political analyst. And Governor, good to see you. We're going to turn. You have a new book, which we're going to turn to in a moment. But first, let's just get your thoughts as to what you've seen out of Washington in these last few days with President Trump defying some skeptics, even in his own party, by implementing these huge, broad-based tariffs, and certainly has caused a lot of panic.
Well, I think it's consistent with what the foreign policy is, which is to kind of withdraw America from the world, to say, we've been a victim. I mean, that I don't understand. We're a victim. When you take a look at the growth in wealth, not just for us, but countries around the world, this idea of retreating after 80 years of peace and prosperity, where we're not going to really support the Ukrainians. We're now going to get into a tariff war with everybody. What this does is it creates uncertainty and a lack of trust in the minds of leaders around the world. So when he says, well, you got to come back to the United States, well, what's the next president going to say? See, there's a danger in this. The reason the market peaked up today is because a lot of people who have been silent are speaking out, and some of them are influential with Trump. And so that's why he's now turned to negotiation. Ironically, Stan Druckenmiller, who's spoken, and he's a friend of mine, Scott Bessent used to work for him, and Stan was quoted just the other day talking about the fact that these tariffs are wrong. I've always thought that what would move Trump is when people who are kind of close to him or who he depends on or listens to say to him, this policy is just not good, and the policy is terrible. Yeah, negotiate one country at a time. Don't use a sledgehammer. We have to be careful that America, we don't want us to withdraw. We're the inspiration for the world. We set the value system for the world. And if we withdraw, chaos. And that's what we've been seeing.
John, talk about your book. You talk about how you think it's important that politics be taken out of the day-to-day of that religion, that faith be taken out of the day-to-day of politics, and instead focus on local faith-based institutions that can help their immediate communities. The book's called Heaven Help Us, How Faith Communities Inspire Hope, Strengthens Neighborhoods, and Build the Future. Talk about that, if you will.
Well, Joe, this is right up your alley and Mika's alley. I mean, this is a book that says that an individual can find purpose and at the same time build a stronger community in dealing with some of the toughest issues that we have. So when we're out protesting in rallies, the question is, what are we going to do today or tomorrow? What are the positive things that we can do to make a difference in the world? The book is not political. It includes the church community, that church faith community, the synagogue community, and the Muslim community. And these people who use the institutions of the church to get support, Joe. Like when you ran for office, you needed a political clubhouse. Well, if you want to change the world on things like homelessness, on human trafficking, on changes in foster care, if you want to get involved there's a guy in the book that's feeding 571,000 people a day, every day, who started out being inspired by Mother Teresa. I mean, what it is it's a playbook. It's a playbook for people who want to find a purpose and figure out how to have their hopes, their dreams come true through the power of faith institutions.
I think it's so important.
Trump first. Have a listen to this. It gets even more wild. And I don't want to make any jokes or anything about stuff. This is actually quite serious and sad. He talks about Gaza. You'll see.
To get to a deal, and do you think blocking humanitarian aid is also an effective pressure tactic?
Well, you know how I feel about the Gaza Strip. I think it's an incredible piece of important real estate, and I think it's something that we would be involved in, but you know, having a peace force like the United States there controlling and owning the Gaza Strip would be a good thing.
So now he's talking about an American peace force in Gaza Strip, right? Owning and controlling. You heard it for yourself right there. And I just want you to see the train of events and the train of logic, right? So Bassent's like, oh yeah, we're negotiating with 50, 60, maybe even 70 countries. Israel's then going to be the example. What's the example? USA, I guess we're most likely going to sell weapons. Then I guess we're selling, sending troops. And I guess we're going to occupy, own, and control. And then Trump will build his hotels. That's the plan. I just want to make sure it's clear so you guys understand what's going on here. Because I know a lot of people, they talk with your MAGA friends or family members and they don't know. But this is what it is. They tell you what it is.
Because right now, all it is for years and years, all I hear about is killing and Hamas and problems. And if you take the people, the Palestinians, and move them around to different countries, and you have plenty of countries that will do that.
Right, so they're just going to move the Palestinians. So that's their plan. Which I'm not thrilled about, and I can go on and on about this, but I just want to show you what they're saying, and I'm sure you guys understand. If you want to say just basically stealing their land to build Trump hotels, you can say it that way. There's any number of ways you can say it. So this is Fox News actually calling out Bassent on his BS. Have a listen to this.
We will grow. We, the United States, will grow faster than Japan. We will grow faster than almost anybody. Therefore, almost by definition, by growing faster than the rest of the world, we're always going to have a trade deficit. So I don't know why you'd want to use the trade deficit in a calculation for a reciprocal charge. I understand your point about non-tariff barriers. I get that. That's why I would have chosen a handful of countries, I don't know, maybe 10 or a dozen countries, and really carefully pinpointed it. But to apply this to the whole world on the basis of trade deficits, is that really the best in your judgment? You've been around a long time. You've looked at these.
So you can see they're already calling it out. I mean, it's obvious. The way that the Trump people did these tariff things, they probably just used ChatGPT. That's what people were saying. And effectively just doing this haphazardly with all countries. And then, Fox News, they're at least being a little bit honest here. I say a little bit because they say a bunch of misinformation all the time. I've told you guys this before, USA is a wealthy nation. And this idea that, let's say we'll pick a country, we say, for example, Vietnam. This idea that Vietnam is going to buy as many products from the USA, I say USA would buy products from Vietnam, is frankly ludicrous. The income, the average median family income in the USA is much higher than Vietnam, and this would be many countries out there. And also, Fox News is also correct. It is true that the US GDP will grow faster than other countries, right? So this idea that they're using deficits that don't really make a lot of sense when the Americans consume much more. There's a whole bunch to go over this. So the plan for Trump was to bring a bunch of jobs back to the USA. Theoretically, I guess we're all going to be building iPhones, but then Apple's got different plans. Apple's saying, you know what, we're going to get around your trade barriers and we're just going to start building them in India and do it that way, right? So screw you, Trump, on that, trying to, go to China. Have a listen to this. It gets even more nuts.
We have now $7 trillion. Think of this, $7 trillion.
So listen to it again. What did he just say? He said $7 trillion. Now, I just want to make it clear because they just make stuff up the same way Bassent's like going, oh, we got 50, 60, 70 countries, right? I'm just adding countries on a whim. Now, suddenly we've have another 2 trillion coming in, because before the last week or so, they've been bragging about we got this 5 trillion of phantom investments coming in. And now suddenly today, out of thin air, we've generated under 2 trillion. And I just want to make this clear, guys. They're just making stuff up. Even the 5 trillion number was just literally just making stuff up because it's based on a bunch of pledges. Money actually hasn't arrived. No ground is being broken. And this is all, based on this AI, crypto hype, stuff like that. It's a bunch of thin air. It's like this. Now we got 2 trillion out of thin air, evidently. Another 7 trillion total is what we're saying.
We have now $7 trillion. Think of this, $7 trillion of commitments from companies wanting to go in, from Apple to many, many companies.
But that takes time.
Many from Taiwan.
And that's why I just showed you the Apple thing. Of like Apple's like literally the headline today is like, hey, we're going to be building in India. So, and you know, and if you didn't think it could get even wilder, it does. This is the Chinese embassy in the USA. So this is like, you know, if you want to call it communist propaganda, you can. But this is what the Chinese embassy is tweeting out today. They're tweeting out Ronald Reagan. For real, this is like how much of a bizarre world can we be in where I'll play a little bit. You can see what I'm saying. This is from the Chinese embassy.
You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying.
You know what's crazy? When the Chinese government is tweeting out Ronald Reagan. That's the world that we live in. And then you got this. The Senate is trying to put together something to limit Trump's power on tariffs and stuff. I'll read it here. It says, Congress, Senate Republican leader John Thune predicted a bipartisan bill that would give lawmakers greater oversight of President Donald Trump's tariffs and would languish in Congress, writes Bloomberg's Alicia Diaz. So they're trying to do something, whether or not it comes up. I guess they picked up 6 other Republicans, right? So we'll see. Keep an eye on that. But they're trying to do something. And then you got the Chinese Communist Party over there. They're tweeting out this and sort of mocking America as being America first and against global trade, which is opposite of what Reagan would have said. Lutnick, right, which is Trump's commerce dude, he's telling us we're all going to get jobs. I just want you to have a listen for yourself. You can hear it.
Great American workers. You know, we are going to replace
on other
the
networks.
armies of millions of people. Well, remember, the army of millions and millions of human beings screwing in little screws to make iPhones. That kind of thing is going to come to America. It's going to be automated, and great Americans, the trade craft of America, is going to fix them, is going to work on them. They're going to be mechanics. There's going to be HVAC specialists. There's going to be electricians. The trade craft of America.
Yeah. So I guess according to Lutnick and Trump, I just wanted to tell you what their plan is. I guess Apple and everyone's going to build, you know, factories. $7 trillion is the number that they're throwing out there. I'm telling you, it's just nonsense. But I just want to show you what they're saying. And then I want to also show you again, Apple just announced today they're going to try to go through India. Then you got this crazy thing in the market. There was this tweet out that said, hey, maybe the tariff's going to be a 90-day pause. That ended up being fake news. There was this weird account called Walter Bloomberg. This was the headline from Financial Times. An anonymous X account sent markets reeling today. And you guys know this. X is owned by Elon Musk. And so is Elon Musk, Trump, and whoever this Walter Bloomberg dude, are they all figuring out ways to manipulate the market? Is that what they're up to? I don't know. I'll just say this. This is the era that we're in. It is not a good sign. Wall Street's calling for recession. You see these wild market swings. That means for an unhealthy market. And you just have like this crazy days like this. This is Bloomberg, the real Bloomberg.
It is amazing. They used to have
driving itself into a recession with its global trade war. The Trump administration has already slapped 25% tariffs on some Canadian goods, including steel and aluminum. And on top of that, the US is planning to raise duties on Canadian softwood from more than 14% to nearly 35%. Canadian leaders warn that will send US home prices skyrocketing. Prime Minister Mark Carney is trying to reassure Canadians that despite all the US imposed chaos, Canada can look after itself.
The world woke up to some pretty dramatic moves, and they're ongoing in financial markets. So before I get to the main subject at hand, I want to spend a few moments talking about what that means for us. in Canada. And I think the first observation is what's going on is a direct consequence of President Trump's unjustified tariffs against Canada, tariffs that were first levied on Canada and Mexico, and then on the world. And those measures are going to hit a lot of people's savings, including their retirement savings. And as much as this is unfortunate, it was not unforeseen. This
from Ukraine, from the President Volodymyr Zelensky, that potentially Chinese citizens have been fighting alongside Russian forces. If it's proven that that is the case, what does this mean for the course of the war?
I mean, two or three different things. If they are just Chinese individuals who are fighting effectively as mercenaries, then that's obviously embarrassing to China. But in a way, it goes no further than that. And there may be quite a number of them, because we do know that Russia has been recruiting people from all over the world, lots of nationalities, because they're offering them huge amounts of money, if that's the case. If it is the case that they are there as in some informal but Chinese capacity as advisors, or they've got some sort of function as special forces, that would be very serious indeed, because China has always said that it doesn't help Russia in this war, that it's a neutral country and so on. And we all know that isn't true, but this will be very, very embarrassing for the Chinese, and we'll put another twist on that. Of course, you know, Western countries have advisors that help the Ukrainians, but we make no bones about it. We say, yeah, we agree with what Ukraine is trying to do. We're trying to help them resist this Russian attack, this Russian aggression. And so, yes, our people have been there. They're in and out of the place all the time. We don't comment on special force operations, but of course our advisors have been helping. No, there's no argument about that. But the Chinese pretend that they don't help the Russians. They pretend that they don't, that they're somehow neutral. But we know that they supply enormous numbers of components. They buy Chinese oil more than they actually need themselves in order to help the Russian balance of payments. And if it turns out that they are in some material respect sending Chinese individuals as advisors or in some sort of special forces, that would be very embarrassing indeed. But we're not at that point yet. All we know is that the Ukrainians claim that they can prove that these two individuals that they've got hold of, that they've captured, among the 6 Chinese individuals they say they engaged in Donetsk, which is in the east of the country, it's nowhere near Kursk, where the North Koreans are. But if they've got these 2 individuals and they can prove that they're Chinese nationals, then either they are individuals as mercenaries, or it's something more sinister, and that would put a new turn on the political circumstances in which this war is being fought.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. We look now at the massive protests that erupted Saturday as over 1 million people took to the streets nationwide to tell President Trump and billionaire Elon Musk hands off, saying no to the Trump administration's dismantling of federal agencies and social programs and its attacks on LGBTQ people, immigrants, education, healthcare, science, free speech, and reproductive rights. The coordinated hands-off protests are the largest demonstrations since President Trump returned to office. They took place across all 50 states and across the world. In Europe, thousands gathered in Berlin, Paris, and London to respond to Trump's sweeping tariffs, which have shocked the global economy. This is a banker speaking from London.
He's a horrible, small-minded person who is easily maneuvered. And the people who are maneuvering him are very, very, very dangerous. And he's very dangerous, but he's a small-minded and not, frankly, very smart person. So, no, I don't know what to hope. I just hope this is over soon.
Thousands also took to the streets across Canada to protest Trump's repeated threats of making Canada the 51st U.S. state. Demonstrators condemned Trump's remarks as a threat to Canadian sovereignty. This is a Vancouver protester.
Today, I'm out here to send a simple, clear message to the United States that we're not going to want to be a part of you. We're never going to want to be a part of you. This is very close to becoming a reality down there. Right now, we have our very own election, which is extremely scary with what we're seeing as being the unsaid messages from one side. And I'm here as a visual reminder to let people know that we're not going to let this happen. We're not going to sit quietly.
In the United States, there are over 1,200 protests like this one in Los Angeles.
Well, I've marched before when he first got elected a number of years ago, and I still can't believe that he got elected again. And I can't believe that he's tanking the economy and he's tanking the government, and it's all being done for him and for Elon Musk and all the billionaires and everybody else. It's not for me. It's not for the people who live in my neighborhood. It's for all of these billionaires. And I'm glad to see so many people came out today. I mean, we need it. I want more people to show up and get him out of office. He's terrible.
There were over 20 protests across the state of Colorado, like this one in Denver in the freezing cold, including former and current workers.
My name is Marina Connors, and this one says, hands off public lands. I'm a retired National Park Service employee, and it's kind of, it's really hard to run the parks, and to do it under these circumstances is even more and more difficult.
I am a federal employee today, and hope that I can stay that. Hope that I can stay employed so that I can continue to serve the American people who I swore to serve when I took my oath of office.
That federal worker covered her face, but her sign said, with her sign, it said, "I want DEI in schools, not measles." Protesters estimated to be in the tens of thousands gathered in Washington, D.C. in mass opposition to Trump's policies. A sea of banners and placards filled the Washington Mall, including signs that read, "Resist like it's 1938 Nazi Germany and fascism alive and well and living in the White House." Speakers included Congressmembers Ilhan Omar and Jamie Raskin.
They say, though, well, the number of courts striking down Trump's policies is completely unprecedented. Well, so what? That's only because the number of his illegal actions are completely unprecedented. The judges are doing their jobs. They're doing their jobs. Let's tell MAGA what democratic movements all over the world tell the dictators of the world: hands off the courts. Hands off the courts.
Meanwhile, another protest Saturday in D.C. demanded an arms embargo against Israel and an end to the Gaza genocide and the release of Mahmoud Khalil, Rumeysa, Ozturk, and other foreign university students and faculty who remain in ICE detention, targeted for their involvement in Palestinian rights protests. This is Mohammed Habeh from the American Muslims for Palestine.
I'm here today because for the past year and a half, we have seen the utter destruction going on in Gaza, funded by American taxpayer dollars. We've seen it in the previous administration, and we see now that Donald Trump is continuing and making it worse for the people in Gaza. After a month of fasting in the month of Ramadan, we saw that the people in Gaza were suffering a famine, as well as seeing Israel break the ceasefire and begin massacring Palestinians throughout the month and on the day of Eid. I'm here today because I want the people of Gaza to see that the American people will not accept this, that the American people will stand up against our government as they continue to support this genocide.
My name is Eugene Perrier. I'm with the Answer Coalition, and we're demanding the immediate end of the genocide in Gaza. The U.S. should stop all of its forms of complicity and facilitation of that genocide and do everything in its power to bring it to an end immediately. And we're also demanding the release of the students who have been taken off the streets, abducted, and jailed simply for standing with the Palestinian people, and for all those who have been repressed because of the steps they've taken to stand up for the right of self-determination and liberation of Palestine, to have all charges, all lawsuits or anything like that dropped, and allow people to speak up and speak out against this genocide.
And here in New York City, up to 100,000 people took to the streets in Manhattan, marching from Bryant Park to Madison Square Park. Democracy Now! Was there. There were many issues discussed, among them Rumeysa Ozturk, that tough student who was sent to Louisiana after being driven to Vermont, picked off the streets of Somerville, Massachusetts by masked agents. A judge has ruled her case has to be sent back to Vermont. These were some of the voices.
My name is
Sarah. I'm not with the group. I went to Tufts University, and that is where Rumeysa Ozturk was disappeared from. And she is owed due process and a chance to continue her education, and she was here legally, and it should never be considered illegal to write an op-ed. Whether you agree or disagree with what she said, it's her right. And I just want her to be free, and I want that for all the people who have been disappeared by the Trump administration.
Is the Tufts community active on Rumeysa's case?
Yes, so I know the president sent out an email the other day. The university is standing with Rumeysa and her lawyers, and also many of my fellow alum have stood up, signed letters, and taken action to free Rumeysa and get justice for her.
The President of the United States, a convicted felon, gets his advice from morons like this. Play the clip.
I mean, if you took the people of Italy and you teleported the people of Italy to, say, some part of the United States, it would still be Italy. But if you teleported a bunch of people from some other part of the world to Italy, where they're telling people no longer because they've been teleported to America, then the region, the geographic region, would no longer be Italy. It would be that other country. A country is its people, not its geography.
I mean, okay, if that wasn't just outright him tiptoeing around the Great Replacement theory, which is exactly what it is, it's also breathtakingly stupid at face value. But he's sending messages that don't let people come here and replace you. To which I would say, then get your ass back to South Africa and get a vasectomy and get rid of your hair plugs while you're at it, because nobody
Elon Musk gave these back-to-back gestures that people are saying mimicked a Nazi salute. You see it there. Elon Musk has not directly addressed this, but he has appeared to edit out that gesture from the video that he posted on X, the platform he, of course, owns. Help us understand what transpired.
Thank you.
Oh, careful with that salute.
It wasn't even like a subtle, like a wave, like one of these, like a.
It's okay. It's good to be proud of German culture, German values, and not to lose that in some sort of multiculturalism that dilutes everything.
That's what a Nazi would say.
We don't want Italy as a culture to disappear. We don't want France as a culture to disappear. I think we have to maintain the sort of reasonable cultural identity of the various countries. Or they simply will not be those countries.
Aber der ist wahrscheinlich für Sie auch ein Nazi, hm? Nazis, 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 lauter Nazi.
USA, 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 USA. Ah! Yes.
No, dog. No, this is the Charlie Chaplin mustache.
Hey, so what the fuck was that? I mean, we all know what that actually was, but there are a lot of people online, from Elon Musk simps to professional headline writers for major newspapers, insisting that it was something else entirely. A mysterious gesture, or just what autistic people do, which I can't even begin to pass the ableism of saying that autistic people are just biologically predisposed to seek heiling, as if we could have just stopped World War II if we just replaced all of the Germans' machine guns with fidget spinners or something.
Sorry, I was stimming.
Besides the people just flat out in denial because they've decided that don't believe the evidence of your own eyes and ears was in fact not an incredibly on-the-nose line from George Orwell's 1984, but actually just words to live by, inspiration, hashtag just girly things. And of course, the editors at the New York Times, the BBC, and the Daily Mail, who were terrified of upsetting the richest man on earth, and are filled to the brim with conservative bootlickers whose one job is to make sure that they don't upset too many millionaires by reporting too many inconvenient facts. On top of all those people, you have the people who think they found the world's most ill-timed gotcha. It's not a Sikh Heil, you see. It's a Roman salute.
Well, that's all right then.
Gee, I wonder what the Roman salute is another name for. And wouldn't you know it, I'm perfectly placed to debunk this ridiculous argument along with all the other ones, because I am standing right here in the city where the Roman salute made its way from anachronistic depictions of ancient Roman art to being the greeting of choice by fascists. This is Rijeka in northwest Croatia, or as the fascists would have you call it, that is, by its Italian name, Fiume.
I am in Rijeka in Croatia, or as the nuncio would have you believe it to be called, a Fiume. A Fiume. This city is the birthplace of, among other things, the torpedo, so that's okay, and the Roman salute, the idea of black shirts, the balcony address, and basically all of the aesthetics of fascism were invented here by Gabriele D'Annunzio during his little proto-fascist experiment, and later basically plagiarized by Mussolini, and then plagiarized again by Adolf Hitler, who then added a sprinkle of Germanness and the myth of multiple thousand years of history for a country that had been around for about 200.
And wouldn't you know it,